Okay, then let's continue. We have 15 minutes left for the panel. We will take maybe a few more minutes. So I've prepared some questions, but I obviously try to integrate many of the questions you had. For the panel, we have again Juan with us, and then we have someone who hasn't participated so far. So we're happy to have with us and Meng, who is the head of product management PV at JinkoSolar. Welcome, Anne. Okay, let's maybe start with this biggest elephant in the room. So Jessica showed in her slides that nearly 100 gigawatts were exported from China, and 57% of that has landed in Europe in these 6 months. Juan, you have shown that you expect around, if I recall correctly, 43 gigawatts of installations this year. I think there are a few higher numbers, but even if it's 50 or 55, so that means everything that was installed in the first half of the year is already more than what will be installed, at least in the most medium business as usual scenarios. And on top comes a lot of modules that are still sitting in inventory from last year, because there was also so much more product shipped than that was installed. We also had around 40 gigawatt of installation, and around, I think, if I recall correctly, 80 gigawatts or so were shipped. So just let's dive a little bit into that. What's happening here? So
I can take that if you want then. And hi, Anne, great to have you in the discussion. We basically, our view is that we're getting closer to like an oversupply situation. We think that what's happening, and a lot of you in the audience might have heard this at Intersolar if you attended last month in Munich. A lot of the big Chinese players that have been fundamental, by the way, to the growth we've seen in the industry in the last few years have reshifted or re-strategized their exports from the US, retargeting Europe. From our conversations with the industry, including the big Chinese OEMs, we think that part of the strategy, of course, or this strategy really, it's driven by everything that's happening in the US with the tariffs and like all the policy aiming to protect or to develop US manufacturing, and of course the considerations around the origins of this supply, right, in China. So that's definitely something that's happening. The question is, can Europe take it? Europe can take it, but that's a different story versus how quickly can we deploy this. And going back to that slide where I was showing the barriers, like those barriers are not going anywhere anytime soon. When we're thinking about grid constraints, when we're thinking about the interconnection queues, when we're thinking about the permitting bottlenecks, which are still really harming the rate of deployment. And like I said, we are taking steps in the right direction in Europe, but like when you get flooded with the supply, that's, by the way, I didn't clarify this in the presentation, but just we're very confident in the integrity of our numbers, because basically the distributed solar PV part, it's a different story, because I work on that looking at officially reported government numbers as well as numbers from our installer partners. But then on the utility scale, that's cut clear, like from the product, our product tracking and all those product announcements and our estimations on CODs and when utility scale products are going to come online. So yeah, that would be my answer to that. That's what's probably holding us back, and there's definitely a lot of sitting inventory. There's a lot of floating stock all over Europe.
And then what does it mean? So we have, of course, from last year, we have mostly PERC there. There's now this, we also saw that in our presentation, that there's this this interest in TOPCon. It's moving quickly. Price differences are also not so high between PERC and TOPCon. So will this PERC stuff all have to be written down completely, or will that stay there forever? So what's happening there? The question is also, I just recently read some analysis that a lot of companies, distributors and installers are sitting on that product. But I believe also some companies even still have that, who have shipped product here, some manufacturers. So what are we seeing? How low will prices also fall? Because Jessica simply said she believes that prices might bottom towards in the second half of the quarter. Demand will actually increase even more. And so, but if we look at capacities, we're talking about 1 terawatt of cell capacity almost. And if we saw the numbers here, everyone is still increasing capacity. So it doesn't look like anytime soon demand will catch up with supply. So what's your take on this one?
I think I agree with you. I don't think we've seen the end to the declining prices, and that's also our house view. We have someone dedicated to like project module price trajectories. It's definitely end of year, the soonest. I think the other component to this, and I want to make sure, by the way, that I let Anne, cover some of these points as well. But the other component of this is like, what are the potential policy scenarios to incentivize European manufacturing, right? Because we have declining cost for modules. So the equation of manufacturing modules or other PV components in Europe, and at what cost increase, and what sort of cost increase is the industry willing to absorb when you have very, very hard, very intense pressures from the Chinese supply pushing that price down. That equation, it's either more unstable, right? So from a market's perspective, it sort of even disincentivizes European product more when we have very, this declining trajectory for Chinese supply. So I think that's something that I also wanted to put on the table. What are the ripple effects of this on any potential protectionist, so to speak, or like, domestic manufacturing incentives in Europe? Because it could go both ways, right? Regulators could be pragmatic about it and take, make the most of the supply, or they could press harder on the regulation side. And, we might see domestic manufacturing or even local content requirements coming sooner than we expected, or new regulations that weren't necessarily incorporated on the Net Zero Industry Act, right? Because of all these dynamics, right? So I think that that's another scenario that we're definitely contemplating and monitoring very closely at WoodMac. I don't know if that answers the question, or if it's even more food for thought.
Yeah. So let's maybe bring Anna also into the discussion. Anna, so I think Jinko is also having we've seen that also in Jessica's slides, is the biggest, or has been the biggest manufacturer in terms of module capacity. So what's your product strategy in this situation?
Yeah, say actually we Jinko have the full nail series to cover almost all those applications scenario. The first we have the N-type 78 and 16.6 piece for the larger utility scale, and the second we do have the 72 piece for the larger C9. And lastly, we do have residential scenario, and almost all of this module, all of these products, the power being is actually very competitive. And I want to mention our new products of the rectangular 16/6 piece. And you know that we reached agreement with the other first-tier module suppliers. Should be the early of this month. Yeah, we agreed agreement regarding the modules dimension of the rectangular products. And finally, the module size, it has been confirmed it should be at 2x1134. And this module's dimension, we selected the 16/6 piece. And with the support of these products, its power beam can reach up to 625 watt. And it will be a very competitive product, no matter in the utility scale or the larger CNI. Yeah, thank you.
How much of this this new standard will be produced by you? Does that mean you will abandon the other the older sizes, or will you continue that and that will be an additional product?
It will be a new product. Firstly, this it will be enter mass production in the November of this year, and the capacity will be over 10 gigawatt. We will have 2 factory base to produce this new product. The first one is in Shangrao in Jiangxi province. Yes, this is very safe. Yeah, and the second will be in the Jiangxi, our super N-type N-type factory base. Totally, these 2 factories will have our new products of 16/6 piece. The full capacity will be over 10 gigawatt in the next year. Yeah. And no worry, our 16/6 rectangular products will coexist with other, for instance, 16/2, 72 or 78 piece. They both existed, not a replacement. Yeah.
And your total capacity by the end of the year will be across the value chain?
Yes. Let me check. Yeah. Our capacity of N-type of this year will be around 17 gigawatt. Wait.
Okay, and total?
Wait. Total, including P-type and N-type, our modules for capacity of this year is 90 gigawatt.
Okay. Yeah. And cells, wafers?
Wafers, say 17, yeah.
70, okay. Okay, interesting, thanks. So when we
75, sorry. Our says, let me address that our N-type's capacity from wafer cell to module is 75 and 90 gigawatt at the end of this year. And our N and P types products shipment of around 31 gigawatt on the first half of this year. And we Jinko also ranking the first place of the globe shipment. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Maybe Juan, back to you. So talking about, you mentioned already in the beginning about your research, but there was also one question regarding general market size, and I think that's important. So if we compare, you know, there's several market analysts outside, and the numbers, so I've seen so far are expecting for this year rather around 340 to 350, sometimes more. I think there were some companies that were even expecting over 400 gigawatt. I believe that's maybe part of the problem because they were anticipating too much growth, and that's why we have all these overcapacities now. But I think your numbers are considerably below these 340, which is 50.
We are at 270 gigawatts DC for 2023.
And
question.
this is your medium scenario, and what's your high scenario?
That's our base case. That's our base case scenario. Yes, that's what I was presenting today. Our base case scenario. Depending, like the variables that would move the needle on the bullish scenario. The bullish scenario, it's like roughly. It really depends on the region, because the other thing is like we're harmonizing such disparate markets, right? So different to each other. Then it's quite complex when you look at the regional spread of everything, right? And you put it together. But roughly, you're talking about a 20% increase over the base case in our bullish view, depending on how quickly. Just to refer back to Europe, right? How quickly can we see impact from this alleviation of the permitting bottlenecks across Europe? How quickly can we see installation, manpower ramp up in the residential segment, for example, which is really holding us back? How quickly can we see a transition again in residential solar to a third-party ownership model that will mitigate the impact of very high interest rates, for example, or other forms of financing, if you're thinking about utility scale, which is definitely also being impacted by the macroeconomic environment and everything that's happening with the cost of capital being higher this year, right? So depending on those variables, obviously we could see a more positive outlook. And then the other thing, like I was saying, I think with REPowerEU, probably more on the GG front, right? But we have direction of travel that has already pushed the outlook. This is already more aggressive. I've really pushed our residential and our C&I views the last couple updates, the last couple of quarters. When we see a lot of these mandates solidify, when we get clarity on the exemptions and we compare that versus the total addressable market, we'll probably keep seeing updates to the forecast, right? So it's definitely a moving target for us, right? But we need to have proof. We cannot be forecasting on speculation. So maybe that's also the difference in the approach versus other research shops. But yeah, it's 270 for the base case scenario as it looks right now.
Okay. And your assumption in terms of pricing when you look at your market scenarios, what are you assuming? Are you do you agree with Gessi that basically we will see a bottoming? I think for silicon might have already happened, so at least we saw at least some pause. Last week prices were even going a bit up. On the wafer side, it's different still. The big two are still sometimes dropping prices dramatically. But how are you seeing the development there, especially also in considering or in perspective to your market demand forecast?
Again, we can't talk about markets in bulk, right, Michelle? We need to differentiate whether we're talking about a segment or the other. Let's go step by step. So like when it comes to residential, when it comes to C&I don't really see too much of an impact as we would see perhaps in utility scale or like large procurement exercises, because we know for a fact, and I think you might agree with me on this, that a lot of installers across Europe are not necessarily modifying total installation cost, even if they're getting lower price modules, right? They're just improving their margins, because at the end of the day, like demand, it's still historically, comparatively, it's still at record high levels. So on the residential level, potentially the lower spectrum of commercial, I don't really see too much of an impact in terms of what could potentially happen to module prices. And by the way, our view, it's similar to Anne. We just think that there's room for even farther declines farther down the line, just looking at this gap, this huge saturation in terms of supply right in Europe. And again, I'm referring to Europe specifically here. Now, utility scale, I think that's a different story. Like I said before, I am not covering utility scale specifically or at a more granular level, but from my conversations and from coordinating our global solar product, I know that the impact of declining module prices could be more substantial with large scale solar, but definitely with residential and the lower spectrum of CNI, I don't think that we would see something very dramatic because of what's happening with installers and the fact that their margins are improving. I think what could have a lot more impact, and perhaps this is like a year down the line, maybe 18 months down the line, it's like really ramping up installation, deployment, capacity, manpower, like, and women power, like installation capacity, like for rooftops, right? Like that's the gap that we have identified. That is why we're seeing like this mismatch. It's the fact that we cannot deploy as quickly as the market is asking us to deploy, as quickly as, you know, we cannot empty these warehouses as quickly or as naturally as you would in a more stable market. That's the bottom line, and I think that's consistent with what we're hearing from a lot of national solar associations as well, right? They're trying to really incentivize training programs and standards to make sure that we get more installers, more installation crews deploying. Probably less of a problem in mature markets, of course, like Germany, like the Netherlands, but definitely a big problem in the mid-level or emerging markets.
Okay, yeah, interesting. I would agree on this, and I think what also plays maybe into that in that line of argumentation is also that we have now we have high interest rates, which is actually a little bit market counterproductive. But on the other hand, of course, we're also seeing less activity in the construction sector. So that means in the midterm, since this environment probably won't change, guys from that segment will move into solar. And so we will get more installers. As you've already mentioned, a lot of the bigger installers have their own academies also now to train installers, especially on the DC side, where it doesn't take too much time, right?
Yeah. And then on the large scales, I have a tendency to like focus on the market that I know, the segments that I really know well, right? Like residential and CNI, but there's something really interesting happening in some markets, particularly in Spain and in Germany, when it comes to grid congestion and the ripple effects of that on net load and the ripple effects of that on capture prices. And ultimately, IRRs for large-scale projects in solar are starting to look nastier than they were looking just a year ago because of this saturation. And I'm still shocked by the fact that we are not addressing the crucial need for storage probably to the extent that we should be addressing it as an industry, right? Not just this forum, just as an industry, but and we're not seeing enough regulatory push to incentivize storage capacity in auctions, through tenders, through any procurement or any deployment mechanism in Europe particularly. So I hope that we have developers in the room, and I don't know if they want to comment on this, but certainly, and I know as a matter of fact, like specifically in markets that are leading the region, like Spain and Germany, like this is already happening when it comes to IRRs and the ripple effects of capture price. So I think that that's another barrier to growth. And I'm also thinking about a specific question that I saw in the chat, which was like, okay, so what's the end game of this? Like, what's the repercussions of this? Well, obviously, organically, if IRRs look worse and we don't fix that, and the market doesn't, there's no change to that, we will see an impact on build-up. It's simple logic there, right? So just to comment on the utility scale side, because I wasn't really addressing that, I think.
Okay. So maybe, Anne, would you like to comment from the product side on this whole discussion and developments?
You mean the products dimension?
Yeah, so in terms of so how you are addressing this current market development with your product developments. You already mentioned you're moving TOPCon. I think so. So can you? How is your product roadmap actually looking like? Also addressing what we're seeing at the moment: lower prices, push to lower costs, and
Mm, mm. Okay, thanks, Michael. Yeah, actually, as I introduced just now, we in the before now they have the full TaiyangNews product series to cover almost all the scenarios you can see, and in the future, we may consider to we'll either a new product, new rectangular products, because it's stand for the important technology direction in the near future, and all the other peers I think are on the way to move to the rectangular products. This will produce a new modules dimension and will produce a new modules power beam. Yeah. So this is first, and the second, in terms of the sales technology, our roadmap, and we, yeah, and you know that we JinkoSolar stick base to our entire TOPCon technology. Yes, although some others go with HJT, for instance, Huasheng, and already they may take two ways. The first is HJT, and the second is TOPCon, but we JinkoSolar only chose for now only chose TOPCon, and it should be in the recent years. And in the coming, for instance, maybe 3 years later, or 2 or 3 years later, in 2026, we may overlap. We may overlap tandem technologies under TOPCon cell based, and we expect at that times the maximum efficiency will be 32% or above. Yeah. So so this is my answer on your question. Yeah.
Okay, super. Thanks.
Question.
Okay, maybe one final question. So what would be your key recommendation if you had looking at clients? So what would be your key recommendation to a developer looking at the market right now and all what's happening, and to a big integrated module manufacturer? So what would you tell them?
I think a developer on the utility scale side of the equation.
Yeah, you can have one on the utility and maybe one on the C&I, so let's take 3.
Yeah, I think let's start with the module manufacturer. I think that also part of the mismatch that we sometimes see, and I talk to vendors as well, right? I talk to the big module players as well. One of the mismatches we see is that they're targeting specific, again, I'm thinking about Europe, right? We can move this to other markets if we want, but they're thinking about specific European markets as part of their business development strategies. And they're relying on a lot of mature markets, and then they might be making assumptions on emerging markets. I think that fixing that in terms of re-strategizing or thinking even more thoroughly about the emerging market potential in Europe specifically, I think that can really solve part of this mixed match, because obviously their inventory and like their sales targets are addressing a number of European markets. I would argue that a lot of them are not present in perhaps a lot of Eastern European markets that are definitely harder to enter. Who is really prioritizing Croatia, by the way, which in my mind, it's a very interesting place to be looking at for solar PV, maybe more on the GE side, but right. So there's this match because the outlook that I presented, it's regional, and it's a lot of like the intricacies market by market that are really bringing things down. By the way, the market is like still projected to grow 7% year on year. 8% up to 10%. So like that's significant growth in our mind as well. Obviously not what we have seen in 2022, but that was the exception. That was a perfect storm and then energy crisis, and right. Moving back to the developers, my recommendation is like to start thinking about IRRs, because I cannot stress the number of times that they're surprised by this sort of revelation on everything that's happening with capture prices in Spain. And they're really coming to us and asking, okay, but how is this going to evolve in the next 3 to 5 years? So my big recommendation there to a utility scale developer is like, start thinking about this. particularly if your development pipelines are more exposed. Ergo, if they're really prioritizing Spain or really prioritizing Germany, which are two markets where we're really seeing this phenomena of capture prices impacting IRRs. Because a lot of developers are not even really addressing it or second guessing it, I would say. Or that's been my experience talking to utility scale players so far.
The others each in two sentences. C&I recommendations and C&I
recommendations. Hold your horses, because I think, like I was saying before, I think the potential of the commercial rooftop mandate that we saw in REPowerEU 2026, 2027, I think that is massive. But we need to understand how that will be transposed at a national level. Maybe a recommendation there as well would be, there are markets, and you're in Germany, Misha, that's a very good example. There are a lot of German lands that are ahead of the curve, and they're already implementing these mandates for commercial solar 5 years before REPowerEU, 3 years in the case of commercial, 5 years in the case of residential, before REPowerEU is hitting. So really prioritize like those places. Austria is another example. Some Austrian regions are already mandating rooftop solar for certain segments. Switzerland, it's another example of a market that's really ahead of the curve when it comes to mandates for commercial and resi. So that would probably be my recommendation for C&I players and resi players, actually.
Okay, and manufacturers, maybe we're seeing also, you also mentioned we've seen protection measures in Asia, and we see protection measures in the US. We see, of course, a push for local manufacturing in Europe. So what's your, so I think we see some of the Chinese manufacturers at least having set up or announced also setting up capacities in the US. Jinko already has something, Longi announced something, recently Canadian announced something. So what would you recommend those guys when you look at Europe?
I think we need to, it's the same with the forecast, right? We're going by what we know and the hard evidence. If you look at the Net Zero Industry Act, I think that for Chinese players, in many ways, that is sort of good news, because that regulation, it's not mandating local content requirements to the extent that it could, and it's not putting, let's say, millions of euros or billions of euros even behind subsidies to really push for a lot of those manufacturing lines to actually be relocated, right? It's softer, there's softer forms of policy. However, and we haven't even mentioned this, but there's this idea that I think the European PV Industry Alliance has been talking about. They certainly we're talking about it on at JinkoSolar last month. It's the best in class technology, right? And potentially having a best in class score that could be factored into European tenders, for example, which would pertain not so much to price, or that price would not be the only factor, right? Like you would have standards around supply chain traceability, standards around carbon footprint of your module production, standards around manufacturing conditions, labor, corporate social responsibility. I think that, that is a very probable scenario. So my recommendation to module players, specifically from China, is like, learn about how this could look like, be ready for it, because this will be a demand from the European market probably sooner than later. It looks like the direction we're headed to incentivize more European manufacturing might not necessarily be subsidizing the gap in prices, which is considerable, by the way. We forecast that it's between 15 to 40%, which is like, could be very, very impactful. But so like I'm saying, like not necessarily that might be moving the needle, but more conditions around the quality of the product through all this, all this different criteria that I've mentioned. And some players are already ticking those boxes. Some Asian players are definitely ticking those boxes already because they know the market is asking for it, and it's just not all about price. But I think that that's my personal bet is that that's the direction that Europe will be moving to, as we replicate or as we see some harmonization with some of the measures that the Biden administration has taken in the US. I hope that answers the question.
I think that's fine. So then let's come to an end. We are already 20 minutes late. So I think we still have quite some people with us. So my personal takeaways are from them for market development. I think, first of all, it's complicated and it's getting even more complicated because on the one hand, we have all the big companies expanding dramatically, maybe in the short term, expecting demand to grow faster than it actually does, although demand is growing quickly and also, yeah, more than several anticipate, but not as much as manufacturers would love to see. Solar is considered so attractive that many new companies are joining the segment. We can see that every day in our China news snippets, which we publish on TaiyangNews, or every second day where you see about a company that you've never heard about trying to move into the sector. Let's see if they make it, but at least they try, and for a while they will. So that means that adds up to new capacities. Overcapacities will stay for a while. Prices probably will stay under pressure for quite a while. And that will also give in this defragmenting world a boost to solar, which is at least promising some energy security that was not related to renewables in the past. So markets will continue to boom, although we might still face some consolidation next year with all this price pressure and all these new players coming into the sector. So as I started, it was never boring in solar. I think it won't be boring in solar. And so let me just finalize quickly. Once again, Uday, maybe you can show the slides. I would like to say once again, thank you, or point maybe actually at this product of us. So we monthly show the highest efficient modules. This is actually how companies try to differentiate, and we show the commercial ones. We are updating that every month. Next slide, please. Udaya. These are our products. We're coming up with reports every month. Our latest is our top solar modules overview. We're coming in the next few days with a new product overview on the most interesting products that were presented and introduced during SNEC and Intersolar Munich. I would also like to say thank you to our sponsor, Trina Solar, and would like to point at our next event, which will be on solar power plant developments. Juan was our expert mostly on distributed solar. We will also next time focus more on the utility scale development of things. We will also look into what's going on there in terms of products. We will look also into developments in the O&M space. We will also look into what Juan mentioned, this hybrid topic, which is a very crucial piece of the jigsaw in the future for large-scale solar, so that you combine solar with wind and storage, for example, and that will be our next event. Thanks again for staying with us, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Anne. Thanks, Juan.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Take care.